Hey guys, welcome back to MJ Misadventure. Today we are finally going to test the Razorback. A lot of people were talking about belt temps and some of the information that was there. So I spoke to Steve Crane over at Main Street Cycle, and he said, you know what, I want you to test it. What our numbers are doing in the real world, and about belt temps are an important thing. Anything over 200 degrees, you start causing some issues. To be honest, if you have a 950, you know exactly how hard it is to mess with these clutches and these belts. They're kind of buried in there. So today we are testing the 3.2 belt temp gauges, the newest one that's out, the actual gauge itself, and then the actual switch to turn it on and off. What's interesting about this one that I learned while going over it, at least trying to get some knowledge about it, the 3.2 has the ability to even run a blower fan for the guys out in the Southwest, stuff like that, where you're doing a lot of sand or even in the mud. You do have the option where you're putting a lot of belt temperatures in these things. You can also control warning sensors, such as like how hot it gets, what the temperatures are. When you want the warning lights to come on, it will give you, I think it's 3 or 4 warning lights. I think it's 4 total. You can set your initial belt temp to where it'll just kind of alert you and say, hey, you know, keep an eye on it, you're getting a little hot. Then it'll warn you at 200 degrees. I think it's 225 and then 240. You got your main power wire, which sends everything up to the front. That's switch cable. It goes right to your switch. Just a positive, negative, pretty nice. Then this is your second wire harness, which is your infrared gauge. It actually goes to the infrared temperature sensor on the CV system or wherever you choose to mount it. So pretty simple. Goes straight to the back of the gauge. The gauge is right here. One's for your power. The other one goes straight to this. So, and then they give you both the fittings you'll need to plug into the back of the gauge, and then those are your battery terminals right there. They also sent an autometer gauge pod for it as well, so you can use the automator gauge pods and connect it to wherever you'd like to. My idea, because this is a threaded setup, the luxury of this is you can actually basically put this straight in plastic will be here, and then thread it straight on and lock it right in place. I already kind of worked on pulling the seats out in the center console out, just because I've never done it and I wanted to figure out how to do it. So the wires will run straight through. Basically right here you have a factory wire harness. You can take the camera and stick that down in here, and right here you have a factory wire harness. I'm probably just going to end up zip tying it straight to that just to make it life simple. I'm going to give that back over to Jamin here, and then what my plan is, I'm actually just going to cut this little piece of plastic and mount it right here, just because I like that placement for it. I know with the gauge pod you can kind of mount it anywhere, cage wise, interior wise, kind of wherever you want. I just like it down here so that way it's right next to my switch controller, and my switch will be right here. So I'm going to use these two for this, and then the switch will go there. So let's get started. So here's the primary wire that actually goes to the little infrared sensor. That is the actual infrared sensor. Super simple little thing, really tiny. Plugs straight in here, and then from what I had read, you actually spin that nut up to keep tension on it, and then this goes in. Simple as that. So your CV on the, at least on the Z950, the CV cover is right there, basically straight down. So I'm just taking the flared end, or the 90-degree angle end, dropping that down past the frame rail, giving myself plenty of excess slack, so I got plenty there. Fortunately with Razorback, they give you enough room to pretty much do a 4-seat if you wanted to. So there's plenty of excess wire and cable here. Routed is right with the factory harness right there. This is going to pass up through here. I'm going to lay that right there for right this minute. And once you take your time, it takes about a minute to fish this thing up. Get your 2 power wires up here. I'm just going to lay them right here for right now, because I'm still going to work on the inside and work on kind of straightening up all of the wiring in there and getting it tight. And make sure something that's important, you do have a drive shaft running through there, and you also have your radiator lines going through that same little channel. Take your time and make sure nothing's going to catch anything that's rotating. Get next to anything that's going to get really hot. I don't know if it'll affect the gauge in any way, but let's be honest, heat and electricity they just don't work well together. So guys, we are back, finally working on this thing again. Sorry about the change in the attire. Had to take a few days. I had to end up getting another hole saw. I thought I had the correct size and I didn't. But we're gonna go over all that here in just a minute. To finish up this gauge install, what you're gonna ultimately need is you're going to need a 2 1/8 or a 54 millimeter hole saw that matches up, and then, if I'm not mistaken, I believe this is a 1/2 inch drill bit to drill through to where you can get the sensor in. And then other than that, those are the only two things. Remember, you won't necessarily need the actual hole saw if you don't intend to drill it into the dash. I do intend to put it in the dash. So let's get on it. Alright guys, so we've got the holes drilled. After doing a few measurements and everything, I don't know how well. Here, let me take you off this little stand here. So if you look, you can see how it doesn't look like much is sticking through. But after doing some measurements of where I have this on my belt placement, here's my outlet. And I put it between these first two holes up on the top. Because to me at least, it keeps it up kind of high and dry. And should keep, because of the angle of everything, it should keep water running off of it and everything else. We're going to go ahead and put this on and take a look and start testing everything out. So what do you say? Let's go. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, we got everything installed, just letting everything warm up here real quick. We hop in here, and so far I've got to say this thing is pretty neat. It's on right now, so that's giving me my current belt temp, my voltage, everything all right on this, which is pretty neat. So what do you say we take it for a ride? Stop staring at that thing and let's take it for a quick ride. Alright, so let's take this thing for a cruise. And I've got to say that honestly, it's a pretty simple job, to be straightforward with everybody here. It's a pretty straightforward job. It doesn't take much time at all. I think total install time, and that's including filming, probably took me, give or take, about 2 hours. We'll see how this belt temp gauge works. So now that we've got everything pretty much wrapped up, guys, I want to say thank you again for watching. Stay tuned, subscribe down below, you know, hit the bell, all that good jazz. So we'll have some more content coming with this thing here shortly. But I am super tickled with the gauge. After our clutch test, we had a lot of people talking about, man, you need to get a Razorback, you need a Razorback, you need a Razorback, don't use an infrared gun, so on and so forth. So now we got a Razorback, now we got some real numbers. Honestly, from what I was seeing, I was typically running around that 160 mark. To give you a rough idea today, it is 57 degrees outside. A little breezy though, a little warm, not like super hot, but it's warm out. And I did get the belt temperature up to 200, and I think it was like 201 degrees in the video. It shows it. We have a little tiny hill, and I purposely kept driving up it in high range on purpose just to get it hot, because I wanted to see that what the gauge does when it does actually finally hit 200 degrees. That 200 degrees, I think it's like 210, it'll start flashing a little bit, or it's like a slow strobe, and then once you get above that, it'll actually, from what I was reading, it'll start beeping at you to give you a heads up, like, hey, you are getting way too hot, you need to shut this thing down. Or not so much shut it down, but just leave it idling, let that fan cool everything down, or run at a slower speed. I want to show you a few things here that I think are pretty neat. When you go into this gauge, you can press and hold this, and you can see all of the options it gives you. Your belt, your temps and everything else. You can also go through here and change quite a few things, which I think is kind of neat. In all honesty, like, you can change with your flash temp. I purposely turned it on, and then when we go back to the main screen, you'll see it. I purposely got the belt hot because I wanted to see what it would do. And I mean, as soon as it hit 199 degrees, that light lit up right up there on the top, and immediately started warning me, hey, you're getting a little warm here, buddy, you need to back off here. But it gives you a ton of different information. I will say that it is going to show a little higher right now because it's on the downside of the wind, and it's got the engine heat, and the engine is off and the fan's not running, so you do see it showing 169 degrees right now. What's also cool is it gives you a volts gauge down here, and you can pre-program either one of these to, like, I think it's 10 different options inside of it if you choose to. So that's kind of neat as well. I'm down here next to the side of the machine where I just worked, over here by the belt temps, or by the belt box. And I mean, it is pretty interesting. If you look up there, see where I have the sensor at. I did check with their website, and it says to make sure you have at least 2 inches from any heat source, or it can cause slightly higher belt temps. I did check with the exhaust. I'm almost 3.5 inches away from that, plus with this heat boot blowing air back on it. After talking to the guys over at talking to the guys over at Razorback, they'd assured me that shouldn't really be an issue, and if it is, then worst case scenario, I'll have to do some header tape wrap. But I do plan on changing that exhaust here soon. A quick little piece of advice on how to get these belt boxes out, because if anyone who owns a Z950 knows they are a pain in the butt. Even if it's just changing your primary and secondary, it doesn't matter what brand you're using, but if you're using or changing the primary and secondary, all you do is you pop this vent off up here, the external vent, exhaust vent, and then you come down here, and with a 15mm you can pretty much take this rear shock off, grab this whole shock, it rotates up, and it'll sit right here on the corner of the tire. And then all you got to do is basically just kind of wedge it up into that corner there. I know it's hard to tell with my camera angle here, but you just wedge it right up in there basically with the top, and then you just kind of rotate the whole thing sideways, and then it'll pop right out. So it makes life super easy. I believe pretty much all CF Moto brands you're going to have to pull the cover off to do the actual install, where some of the other brands you can do it with it on it, or you drill the metal. We're fortunate that honestly we can drill the plastic straight in, and it makes it so much easier. So I'm pretty tickled with that. So that's definitely something to consider for you guys going down the road. You will have to drill the plastic cover. I ended up just using a little bit of Teflon tape right on the threads there, just to keep it kind of sealed up. I mean, the 1/2 inch hole, that's the other thing. You'll need a 1/2 inch drill bit, a drill obviously. If you choose to mount it in the dash like I did, you'll need a hole saw, and then you'll just need a small screwdriver to pop the sensor, or not sensor, but the switch locations out. You just stick a screwdriver right in the bottom and pop out, and they pretty much pop right off, and then they slide right in. Other than that, it's really simple, and honestly, it's a pretty cool gauge. Gives me a ton of information. I like to run fast. I know running high speeds, you tend to build some heat, just kind of the nature of the game. So pretty tickled to see that, you know, now this girl is running good. Got everything kind of squared away with the belt temps gauge and everything else. So definitely tickled with it. Again, thank you. Stay tuned to MJ Misadventures, and until then,